Oh god, yeah.
Today's episode is in fierce support of Kawhi Leonard and his load management controversy because, Patrick, I'd like to say that both of us have probably been doing some load management for the last 2 weeks, and hence the old breakup of podcasts.
But just like Kawhi Leonard, after a couple of weeks rest, we're coming in hot.
Oh, yeah, we're revamped. I understand what I have to do now.
I'm keen for a deep postseason analytical run right here.
My voice feels fresher, and I can just hear the analogies before they come about.
Lucky you, whoever's listening, essentially.
So you had exams.
Yes.
And they're over now.
Thank God.
And I was in the Bay of Plenty, sitting by the beach and enjoying life.
I know which one I'd rather have.
I mean, it does suggest that there are different forms of load management.
I'd take yours. Thank you.
But anyway, we're back. We have an incredible returning episode for everyone. And we're first going to talk about Luka Doncic and his start to the second year of his... Are we going to say Hall of Fame assured already, Patrick, or is that getting ahead of ourselves?
It's a lock.
Oh, my goodness.
It's just a lock.
That wasn't scripted.
Yeah, no.
So we're going to talk about Doncic first. We're then going to swing to a topic that I always relish, the San Antonia Spurs and how they're looking to make their 21st playoff appearance in a row?
Why we even bother talking about playoffs, but I'll get to it later.
Then we're going to finish with something that really I only bought into a few hours ago, Carmelo Anthony and his return, his Portland return, I should say.
I can't believe it happened.
Look, again.
I can't believe we're already talking about this.
Let's get into that first plug, or I think we're going to lose it, Patrick.
If, like Lucas and myself, you enjoy a side dish of written analysis to go with the main meal, which is this podcast, then you should head to betweenbuckets.com. On the site, you'll find feature articles looking at topics such as Giannis's MVP defense, a critical year for Ben Simmons, and our top 25 player rankings heading into the 2019-20 season. Be sure to check it out, as there are some contentious names challenging conventional wisdom and some familiar faces in declining places. Also, be sure to follow Between Buckets on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for more updates and analysis. Back to the pod.
So, Patrick, this has been perhaps the biggest storyline. It's been consistent. The Mavs have looked good. They've made huge leaps from last season. Doncic is on this remarkable tear. But how much credence do we put in it? Have you moved up your row in the bandwagon? Are you sitting by the driver? Have you booked a return ticket? Where are you? Talk to me.
Oh, I'm all the way in. I'm on the front seat. I was the first on there. Well, actually, I wasn't the first on there, but I like to think that I was. I've liked him since day one, and he has just been on fire this season so far. And we can talk about whether we think this is sustainable at the moment, but if we're only going on what we've seen so far across 13 games of Doncic, it's just incredible. They're 8-5, which is 6th in the West, which is, not fantastic, but in terms of at least my expectations, them going to the season, it's already surpassed that. And in terms of his individual performance, he has been on another planet for only a second-year player. He's 28 points a game. That's 6th in the league. 10th in assists, which is second. He's got 9 boards. He's shooting 47% from the field. And he's just been on a complete tear, especially in the last week or two. I mean, he started the season hot, but this last week or two, he's been on another level. And that's highlighted by just the other day, had a 42-point triple-double on the Spurs in a win, where he shot 50% from the field with 5 threes. And he was just, for somebody his age,
he's younger than us.
He's younger than us, which is just something. And watching him absolutely dominate and make this huge leap from season 1 to season 2 has just been so impressive.
It similarly acts as this mirror of self-reflection, because I watch this kid just torch other elite players and I ask myself, what am I doing?
It's kind of frustrating to watch, isn't it?
It's beautifully frustrating.
God, we haven't accomplished much on the court, and this kid's 20. He's a EuroLeague champion MVP, and he's already one of the best players in the league. Or he's at least challenging that spot.
Absolutely. We'll get into that in a little while. I do want to point out, you did drop his name when we were brainstorming our top 25 to start the season. But when I reviewed it, I didn't quite have enough faith in him, and I feel like that's certainly when we publish the sequel in a few games' time, Doncic will, without spoiling anything, probably make the list, I'd say.
I think that's a lock. I do think reviewing his jump from last season to this season, I clearly wasn't that adamant that he should be in the top 25 because he didn't make it in the end. I was pretty confident that he was around the fringe and at least in the mix, but ultimately I was pretty comfortable with not having him in there. But the start of this season has made us look pretty incompetent so far, at least, because the leap that he's made, he's not just a top 25 player. I think he's in the mix. He's really genuinely in the mix in the top 10 discussions.
Well, I mean, before we get ahead of ourselves and become too self-effacing, whilst I agree that we do look foolish now, 10, 15 games in, but if you look at last season to where he is now, the jumps in just his efficiency, his scoring, stats across the board, it's not necessarily the foreseeable jump. Like, for example, he could halve the leap that he's made and everyone would still be in awe. It's just that he's taken such a drastic improvement. You know, an offensive rating of 107 in his rookie year to 119 now. A player efficiency rating of 19.6 to 30.8, which is an MVP level. And again, look at his win shares over 48, and I think that's a very telling statistic because it shows how you affect the game in a way that doesn't take into the intangibles. And he's at an unbelievable, like his current win share over 48 is higher than MVP winners of the last 10 years, 20 years of all time, really. And if someone had told me that, I feel like it's justified to question such a leap because how many players in the history of the game, Patrick, have made a leap between year 1 and year 2?
I can't think of one, at least on this level. And, you know, sophomore blues is usually a noted thing in the NBA where it's not either not a huge improvement in the second year or even slightly regression. But even if we, you know, listen to counter arguments that it's only a 13-game sample size, which is reasonable, even if he doesn't continue this pace or even regresses slightly, it's such a huge leap from where he was in the first season that it's still going to constitute a massive leap overall, even if he doesn't continue this, because those raw and huge improvements both in those simple box score numbers, points, rebounds, assists, are all up big time, but also in those advanced numbers. And I think this level that he's playing at the moment, he's in one of the seriously elite players of the league, which is a terrifying prospect for the league given that he's only 20, and such a great prospect for Mavs fans given that you have the chance to have this guy for 10 to 15 years.
And what's difficult in terms of predicting whether this is a hot start or whether it will endure throughout the season is, again, it's unbelievable. It's like I said, I can't off the top of my head think of such a jump between year 1 and year 2. But that aside, the areas that would typically affect his efficiency, for example, he has not shot the ball from beyond the arc very well, hasn't bitten into it. So it's not like you can say, oh, well, the reason he's, you know, recording these numbers is because of this, this, and this, when really there are areas he could still take it up a notch.
Yeah, and that's one of the scary things too. Like you said, his three-point percentage has actually dipped a little bit from last season, and it wasn't great last season. It was 32% then, it's 31% now on a high volume, but it's still, the three-point shooting and his turnovers has gone up to 4.6 a game. These are, you know, definitely areas for improvement. He's far from the perfect player yet, but the fact that he's doing all this...
But they're not hurting his efficiency.
Exactly. His efficiency is still great. His field goal percentage, despite shooting worse from three-pointers on more attempts per game, his field goal percentage has still gone up, which I think is one of that can be attributed to he's much better at attacking the rim. Just watching him play so far, last year he looked a little bit sort of tentative. His floater game and aggressiveness and athleticism getting to the ring wasn't quite where it needed to be. But I think that's been one of the major leaps. So from this year, he's finishing much better close to the rim. He's trimmed down. He looks more athletic, and he's taking it to the ring and finishing amongst bigger players. So even though his three-point percentage has dropped slightly, and he's taking more per game, because he's been so successful attacking the ring, his field goal percentage has still gone up to a respectable 47%.
And his true shooting as well, which is another very modern stat. You know, James Harden and for different reasons, Giannis, if we're going off our last two MVPs, have really excelled in that statistical category. because it does denote an efficiency beyond our, generic stats of field goal and 3-point. And to your point about 10, 15 years of this, well, it's not like his game is not in disagreement with longevity. Like, he doesn't necessarily take the same punishment as the smaller point guards in the league, and he still takes all these Luka shots. Like, you watch him take these ridiculous step backs, but he makes them. And even when he misses them, he's affecting the game on really, and I wouldn't say he's a elite defender by any means, but he has made steps there as well. He is literally affecting the game on two sides of the court. And the attention he's now drawing is showing in the way he's executing his assists and the way that the overall Mavs offense is there and succeeding.
Yeah, it's really scary for the league. I think his game is perfectly built for contemporary NBA. I mean, you can see with that step back three, there's a slight comparison to Harden there in the usage and in the ability to get that shot off.
Except there's no travel.
Yeah, the ability to get the hit, high, a good size for a guard, ability to get the shot off whenever he wants it. He's got an inside game, he's got an outside game. And as you said, it's not built on athleticism, so there's no reason why his game won't age really well, and he's going to be a fantastic and elite player for such a long time. I think, looking back on the draft now, and the fact that he was drafted third and then traded to Dallas who had the fifth pick, it's just astounding. I think it's incomprehensible how Phoenix passed up on him. Imagine Luka and Booker on this Phoenix team now. Imagine Sacramento with him now. I mean, I know they had De'Aaron Fox and Hill, but the signs of it were there. I mean, I think the fact that he was
a EuroLeague MVP.
I know at that age, I found it unbelievable then that he was taken third and then drafted below, and I find it unbelievable now. And I think it's going to be looked back on that the picks not to take him is going to age poorly.
It's, without getting too ahead of ourselves, it could end up, you're right, Patrick, and you predict this legendary career. It could end up being one of those, Michael Jordan at third type situations, like Giannis at 15th, Kawhi around the same, Draymond in the second round. It could end up as a Hall of Famer that was blatantly overlooked for no other reason than his game was a little different to what the scouts originally were looking for.
Yeah, and I know it's early days to be retrospective like that.
It is,
I know it is, and I know I'm, it's slightly getting ahead of myself there, but he's just been so fantastic, and the signs were there leading it up to the draft, and it's just being proven now way faster than anyone, including myself, thought. I think he's going to be in the mix. If the Mavs can keep this up, he's going to be in the mix of an MVP candidate, not only this year, but for a long, long time.
Well, for those that are a little bit more skeptical and are rolling their eyes as we predict literally 10 to 15 years in the future, let's narrow that scope a little bit. Tell me how you perceive Luka playing for the rest of the season, how that affects the Mavericks, and if we're talking awards as well, because I've had multiple people in the media that I trust, and their judgment specifically that, predict that he could, be a candidate for the MVP.
Yeah, I think in terms of this season, I'll slow my horses down a little bit. I don't think he's going to be an MVP this year, nor
despite putting up
a
the
serious
numbers.
Challenger. Despite putting up worthy numbers, just because I don't think the Mavs can do much better than 6 in the West.
But theoretically, just like because the parallels are starting to hit me. Let's say he gets to that triple-double status. And I know that the triple-double craze is over because no one cares about it anymore again. But
I shouldn't have cared about it in the first place, but that's something entirely different.
But he's putting up, like literally, if his stats did not change, they're Westbrook numbers from his MVP candidacy. His MVP winning season. And the Mavs are in the same seed that Westbrook led the Thunder. So if he continues to play out of his skin for the next 70 games and the Mavs continue to hold the 5th to 6th seed, are you telling me that you can't see him being in that, top 5 finish for MVP?
Oh, top 5 finish I think is definitely on the cards. I just think I wouldn't put him in the top 3 so far. I think he's in the mix. So probably that 3 to 5 or 6 range at best.
So he doesn't break Derrick Rose's youngest MVP record.
I don't think it's happening.
Not
no.
this season. He will have one more season, by the way.
You had to find a way to sneak Derrick Rose in there.
I thought it was fitting, to be honest. We're talking about someone that is largely because of his age and his team being dismissed for the award. But if you look at what he's doing and if you look at the precedent, it's there.
It's there and it's plausible. And the fact that we're talking about this is a credit to how fantastically he's playing at the moment. I wouldn't put my money on it, but I think the fact that he's even in the discussion shows what an incredible leap he's making in the truly elite level he's playing at right now.
So if we focus on his impact for the Mavericks, do they make the playoffs if he plays like this for the rest of the season?
I think they're definitely on track to make the playoffs. So we're looking at the West, the top 5 at the moment, which I think is pretty likely to hold true. You've got Lakers, Houston, Denver, Clippers, Utah. In no particular order. I think that's a pretty safe bet to be the top 5.
Yep.
And then at the moment, you've got Dallas, Phoenix, and the Timberwolves at 6, 7, and 8. But you've got a few teams like Portland and the Spurs that we'll get to, which might make things a little bit more interesting. But I think Dallas, I personally, before the season, I didn't think they were going to make the playoffs. I thought, other than Luka and Porzingis, I thought the lack of depth around them would really hurt them around the season. But the fact that Luka has lifted his game to such elite level and is getting production out of other players, unnamed Luka or Porzingis, I think they should make the playoffs if they keep up this sort of pace in that sort of 6 or 7 spot.
No, I think I agree with you. We're going to take a quick break before we come back and get into that Spurs discussion. This is a call out for watch enthusiasts everywhere. The Quick20 Network is growing and we now have our very own watch hobbyist website. So head over and visit thenextwatch.com. That's THENXT watch.com. With a ton of reviews, features and weekly columns on watches under 4 figures, thenextwatch.com has it all. So Patrick, there's this great poem called Ozymandias by Percy Shelley, which everyone should read in their lifetime. And the basic message, or well, one of, is that all empires fall and that time gets everything. And I found it profoundly applicable when I did some of my prep for this segment. Because after 20 years, Patrick, the San Antonio Spurs do not look fantastic at the moment, to say the least. And before I jump to you, I just want to share one anecdote. I looked at the game against the Mavericks yesterday, and, relatively close game. Mavericks end up winning, which is fitting considering we just talked about Luka. And I'm going through the box score, and on the mobile app, it's a scroll. So every statistic comes at you as you go through. So I'm looking at DeMar DeRozan, and he puts up 36, and I'm like, ostensibly that's a great game. And then I get to his field goal, and it's 14 from 20, and I'm like, wow, 70% from the field, another great thing. And then I keep scrolling, and I get to his 3-point attempts. And do you know how many do you know how many threes he attempted yesterday and still put up 36 points?
I don't know for sure, but I'm going to guess it's a donut.
It was one of those, custard glazed donuts. It was a Ben's...
They're staring at me in the face.
It was a Ben Simmons 36. It was without...
Which I don't think he's had yet in his career.
Without the defense, the assists, the rebounds, the steals. It was a Ben Simmons 36. And what I found even more hilarious was I scrolled up to LaMarcus Aldridge, who is your wet dream 90s power forward, I might add. Phenomenal mid-range game, and has unfortunately found himself in the twilight of his career where he's still exceptional, but just has he's just one skill short of being, your perfect stretch big. He took one. He missed it. But your power forward took more threes than DeMar DeRozan. Anyway, I just found that pretty funny because whilst I didn't have time to go through, how many shooting guards have put up 35 without attempting a three this season, off the top of your head?
0.
We're going back to Donut King.
Oh, well, other than DeRozan, of course.
Of course. So just tell me, how are you feeling as a diehard Spurs fanatic that has been way too privileged over the last 20 years?
We're going into the season, Lucas. I proclaimed to you and to some of our several close confidants that I was pretty confident about the Spurs this season. Not in the sense that we were throwing back to our championship contending days, but at least that we had an exciting young core to build around. We had a couple of, somewhat all-stars floating around. And I thought we were pretty confidently in that 7 or 8 spot. We'd hold up a competitive first-round series, and ultimately we'd get bounced, but we'd be relevant. We'd be in the mix.
It's a playoff
And I was impressed last year. We lost in Game 7 to Denver, the number 2 seed, when we were obviously number 7, and I thought we've got something here. We had DeJounte coming back. The future seemed bright. Boy, was I wrong, Lucas, because everything has gone terribly in this last couple of weeks. We opened okay. We got a couple of wins.
You did. You were in there.
We had a strong win against Portland. We're close loss to the Clippers. But then things went downhill very fast. We've now lost 6 straight, including losses to Memphis, Minnesota, Orlando, and Dallas, as you mentioned. And the team is not looking good. Our offensive rating is surprisingly high at 5th, but our defense is atrocious at 26th.
Which has always been a Spurs backbone, by the way.
We've always, and even last year, we were a really good defensive team, and I thought we throw in DeJounte Murray, and I thought defense could be our mainstay. I actually thought I would have flipped our offensive and defensive rating. But now I look squarely on the shoulders of my dear friends DeMar DeRozan and LaMarcus Aldridge. And I think, as you were mentioning about the 3-pointers, Aldridge is now taking a career high 1.6 threes a game. Career high. And I just think these two guys are not performing to the level they need. They're both aging, and they make no sense on the team that we have at the moment. I like our young guys. I like DeJounte Murray. I like Derek White. I want to see more Lonnie Walker minutes. But the fact that we're just rolling out aging stars that don't fit the league anymore makes no sense to me. I don't understand the motive to want to be a 7 or 8 seed perennially and compete but not be relevant. I would I'm begging R.C. Buford and the Spurs organization to trade DeRozan and or Aldridge. I know we'd be terrible in the short term, but I would much rather take my chances on the ping pong balls than this average mediocrity. If you think
tanking, Patrick.
I think about competing in terms of when's our next championship. Lucas, off the top of your head, when does the next Spurs championship? When is that coming?
I can't predict when
with the team as presently constructed.
I can't predict when it happens. I can tell you when a slot becomes available for contention, and that's 15 plus years away.
And I know that sounds like an overstatement on the top of the head, but
that's 100%.
If you look at our team right now, we're not building towards the championship at all. Aldridge and DeRozan are not number 1 and number 2 guys on the championship team, not now, especially considering that they're both declining and regressing significantly. It just makes no sense for us to be in this average state of mediocrity ongoing. And I just think these trade rumors and bit of buzz that we're starting to hear about DeRozan and Aldridge, although I don't think that the Spurs are going to do it, because that Pop's not going to want to ride the bench of a losing team in his last season or two, I'm begging it for it to happen. And if you look at the Kawhi deal, we butchered that. We really did. I remember at the time people saying that the Spurs won that deal because we got rid of a disgruntled star in Kawhi Leonard and got one seemingly back into DeRozan, but we lost that deal.
I didn't say that.
You didn't
I said
say
Toronto's winning the championship.
And so we traded an absolute superstar, once in a generation type player, and we got back a guy who doesn't fit the league anymore, who's grounding our franchise in mediocrity. I much would have rather gone for a Jaylen Brown or Brandon Ingram based package. I know that they are not as good as players as DeRozan right now, and they weren't back then, not even close, but I would much rather have some sort of sense of building around the future. And even if you look at this team right now, you look at guys like DeJounte and Derek White, who exploded against Denver and really made a name for himself last year. Do you know how many minutes DeJounte Murray and Derek White have played together so far this season total?
No.
They've played 7 total minutes together. They're the 2 young guards that I want to build this team around, and they've played 7 minutes on the court together. It just makes no sense, and the clear roadblock to them doing this is Aldridge and DeRozan. So I'm begging that they trade him.
Okay, so I have 3 questions.
Here we go.
Because I was listening to your impassioned rant, and 3 came up. One, who would trade for them?
The one name that's been buzzed around a little bit is a team like Orlando, a team that's kind of on the fringe of the playoffs now. They've got the young pieces and they want a bit of a scoring push, so they could go for someone like DeRozan. Honestly, I don't think anyone should trade for them right now for the exact same reasons I want to get rid of them. But I'm just hoping a team
front
buys
office,
themselves
if you're
into it, to be
listening.
honest.
Yeah, no, I am firmly in your court for that. I just don't think they would help the situation, to be honest.
Especially with
I
the
think-
contracts as well. I mean, if you had an Aldridge or DeRozan right now on a cheaper contract, it's akin to that sort of Marc Gasol mold of last season where you brought in an aging sort of former superstar type vet on a friendly contract to a contending team. They could be valuable in that kind of dynamic, but with the contracts that they're presently on, which are in the ballpark of 25 plus million for another year or two, that's superstar number one, number two option money, and they are not those players anymore.
Which brings me to my second question. If the Spurs, as rumoured in the offseason, signed DeRozan to an extension that was initially rumoured to be the max, how many tissue boxes do you require?
Almost too many, because it would signal the death of our franchise as a relevant basketball team for the next 10 to 15 years.
Well, not
it would be for the
necessarily,
next 4 to
'cause you'd be in
5
the
years of
lottery.
them being there, but then it would
You'd be-
take 5 to 10 years to rebuild after the 4 years of mediocrity that we'd have under them.
Eventually, in that fourth, fifth deal of you paying these boys $40 million a year, you'd be in the lottery, Patrick.
And then it'd be another 5, 10 years to rebuild from there. It makes no sense to sign someone like DeRozan to a long-term max or near-max deal as currently constructed. If we wanted to be a middle team, if you wanted to sell some tickets, and if you wanted someone who's going to score a few points and maybe make an all-star team in a good year.
He's not going to do that in the Western Conference.
I know, even that's hopeful. Maybe he could do it in the East, but it's just
No,
he's
I don't
not,
think so
He's
either.
not winning you playoff games in June and July.
He's still on the decline. If you look at his numbers from last season to this season, he is losing his efficiency, and that's because league-wide, the three-point revolution is literally in every team's locker room and the plays they draw up.
Exactly, and as we mentioned, obviously the three-point revolution is a huge thing, but 3-and-D is the name of today's game. You look at the superstars in this league, guys like Kawhi, Davis, Paul George, they're elite on the offensive end, especially in terms of shooting threes, but also on defensive end. DeRozan is neither. We mentioned before that he takes little threes. He's so far taking 0.3 threes per game at 0%.
He hasn't hit one.
The Spurs take the least amount of threes in the league, significantly. And you can tell, although our offensive rating is surprisingly high, we clearly lack the punch to be able to compete with a lot of teams. We can get outshot on any night.
So, effectively, you're calling game and saying no playoff berth this year, no playoff berth next year, rebuild mode. Let's tank.
Well, obviously, if the trend continues now, we're not making the playoffs. That's painstakingly obvious. I think it's plausible that it's turned around and we make that 7 or 8 seed. But as I said before, I don't really want that. I mean, what's the point of seeing your team compete for 4 or 5 games? Well, compete, now say get smacked for 4 or 5 games by Western Conference powerhouse and just be cannon fodder on their path to a championship, while we simultaneously don't compete in the playoffs and don't have any chance of securing a high draft pick. I don't think there's any point sitting in this middle ground.
Well, if the average age of your roster was 24, there is a point to that. Your young guns need to be broken in by the first round. But you're right. You've got 2 plus 30-year-olds who are now archaic in a league that no longer indulges in what they're best at. And beyond that, they're also your 2 highest minute per game. They are both over 30 minutes, and no one else is, ironically. So where's the growth in that? Where's the development?
Yeah, I see the argument that it's, you always want to compete. Young guys like DeJounte and Derek White will get minutes in the playoffs. I understand that, but
there's no playoffs, Patrick.
Getting that experience is one thing, but we're getting held back by DeRozan and Aldridge so much that it's not going to be meaningful or competitive minutes in the long run.
And the thing I think we need to touch on, there is almost this undertone of Popovich, giving the middle finger and just utilizing that genius brain to carve up some mid-range offensive sets, some stagnant ball, and still win some basketball games. And if he wants to go out in that fashion, I'll be clapping. This is the greatest coach of all time, in my opinion. And I feel like that's part of it as well, Patrick. If you look at the way they play, Pop is pulling off some marvelous, the give and go, the pick and roll, the elbow jumpers, the way that he is allowing his players to still carve out some efficiency out of something that is inefficient if it's not done in the most elaborate and exquisite spotlight. The way that he's executing it, there is something poetic about it, and I think it's Pop's shadow, which answers your frustration.
So I think Pop has started to take starting to take a bit more crap from the media about the lack of Spurs success in the last couple of years, but I think what he's been able to do with such a limited roster with a particular skill set has been pretty impressive. I mean,
last year
the reason why we're good, but I mean, Pop isn't just leaning to a mid-range oriented game because he's an old school guy who prefers that style of play. He's shown before that with the right team around him, that our early Spurs team, the 2014 championship team, I would say is one of the sort of pioneers of this pace, space, drive, dish, 3-point game that we see today. It's just that roster had the talent to do so.
Yeah, no one should be questioning whether or not Pop understands that a 3-point shot right now is better than a 2-point shot. It's his personnel. And it's almost like Beethoven using crates instead of a piano. He's still carving out something beautiful. He just doesn't, unfortunately, have that piano to make a better sound.
Yeah, and exactly. And when your two best players are mid-range oriented, defensively lacking players, you kind of have to lead into it a bit. I mean, if Aldridge isn't getting post touches or mid-range shots, then what's he going to do? So you can only do the best with the cards that you're given.
To tie up this segment, who at the end of the season is more disappointed in their franchise, you or me?
I think it might be me. I think... Isn't that something? Because I think I'd rather at least have a couple of young players.
Can I answer why you'll be more disappointed?
Why is that?
Because I've known since the Derrick Rose trade to New York and the Jimmy Butler trade to Minnesota that we were about to descend into some serious pandemonium, some serious horse shit. But with you've had the dazzling brilliance of Pop. That's still, like you said it earlier, he took this team to 7 games against Denver, who is a much better team. Like, there's no doubt about it.
We had no right taking them to 7 games.
No, you didn't, but you did. And by the end of, halfway through that game, I was like, there's a chance the Spurs are going to the finals.
We almost should have won that series. And I was with you. We were going to go up against Portland in the next round, and I didn't hate our chances there either.
Exactly. I thought if they win this, they go to the finals, which is hilarious. And it was because Pop knows how to coach. And it's not a revelation. Again, I think he's the GOAT. But anyway, let's leave it there. Patrick, it's only going to hurt if we keep talking about it.
The pain is too real.
Let's leave it there and go to our fun...
Take this mic away from me.
Let's leave it there and go to our fun fact guy.
Today's fun fact centers on the Toronto Raptors big man and the 2012-13 Defensive Player of the Year, Marc Gasol. During the 2012-13 season, the two-time All-NBA selectee made large leaps on the defensive end of the court, anchoring a Memphis Grizzlies team, iconically known for their gritty, hustle-heavy defensive intensity. In fact, that year, with Gasol locking down the paint, Memphis boasted a 99.1 defensive rating, good for second in the league behind the Indiana Pacers' 99 flat. So impactful was Gasol that he finished first in Defensive Player of the Year voting, but only received enough votes to land him on the All-NBA defensive second team. In the last 37 years, only 4 players have failed to make the All-NBA defensive first team. In the same season, they have won the Defensive Player of the Year award. How is this possible? The Defensive Player of the Year award is voted on by the media, commentators, sports writers, and content creators alike, whereas the all-defensive teams are selected by NBA coaches. While both factions seem to be more closely aligned these days in their opinions, the voting system continues to endure. Back to you, boys.
Thank you, fun fact guy. We haven't thanked him the last few episodes, so I made a note to
Thank you, fun fact guy.
give him a big... Yeah, thank you for everything that
You're
you
the
do.
MVP.
Back to back, really. So, Carmelo Anthony is in the league again,
Wow.
Patrick. And when I heard this, what followed was more convoluted in its despair than the book Les Miserables, which was adapted into a film in the late 90s and again into a musical film with Hugh Jackman.
You're going off the rails today, Lucas. The literary reference is poetry, Les Miserables. Look at you go.
Well, it's dying, man. I'm lying down on the road right now screaming, save the words. And save the trees, for the record. But anyway, where to begin? So, if anyone's read my article on betweenbuckets.com, I was against this from the start. In fact, I urged Carmelo Anthony to embrace his retirement. And the fact that it took 30 GMs not having any interest in him, and then Portland's GM going, holy shit, we're out of the 8. What do we do? What do we do? That's right, let's resurrect a dying star. The fact that it took that process to occur is telling. But let's start from the beginning. I watched this game intermittently because it was painful and I was quite frustrated, and I didn't want to have him. I didn't want to mention his name on this segment today, but it does need to be talked about. So when I checked into the game, I saw him score his first 7 points, and then I stopped and I checked in again, and he hadn't scored again, but he was still shooting 42% from the field and 100% from the three. And look, the way he started the game was great, but it started to dawn on me, Patrick, that
Here we go.
he shouldn't be starting because
He shouldn't be playing.
what is that? But no, let's accept that, like the Spurs and their
Oh, God.
ill fate that awaits them, it's a reality. He's in the league again, okay? We can't change these
He is,
things,
okay.
Patrick. DeMar
All right,
DeRozan
I'll move on.
is playing 32 minutes a game. These are concreted in reality. But he's starting in his first game back in the league. What does that do for him psychologically? It almost
It makes him think he's the man again.
It reaffirms everything that has been his downfall the last 3 years of his career that he was in the league. He made fun of the reporters in OKC for positing the question, perhaps you should come off the bench. Is there more effectiveness there? In Houston, the same thing happened again. He struggled and could not come off the bench. And what does he do after all of the humiliation, all of his struggle where he's been an Instagram sensation in a hood chucking up shots, a dying star refusing to let go of that last bit of life? He starts. And what scares me more, Patrick, is there are starters that know their role, that play within it, that don't get so many touches, that are there for other reasons. They are a piece. They are a rook or a very effective horse in the game of chess. But Terry Stotts ran the fucking offense through him. I'm watching him go to him again and again. I'm watching CJ sit down and Melo grab the ball, turn his back to the basket, and try and get some mid-range going.
It makes...
I'm watching Whiteside turn the ball over because he doesn't understand that Melo plays at a slower pace. See, I can't even speak right now.
It dumbfounded. It makes no sense. And I know on paper, you look at Portland's situation, they've started terribly. They're 5-10, 5-9 before Carmelo today. 14th in the West. They had some bad losses to the Pelicans, Sacramento, Brooklyn, Golden State, and my Spurs. And we can go through some of the advanced numbers if you want, but it's probably easy if you just take my word for it that they're bad. and I look at their injuries. I see that Nurkic is out. I saw that Tolliver's out. Skal Labissiere hasn't been doing much. The corpse of Pau Gasol is still riding a suit. And I know that they need a big and they need an option. But Carmelo Anthony, the answer this early in the season, and to plug him in at the starting lineup, it reeks of desperation. And if anything, it affirms my belief that this Portland slide is going to continue. And I know Dame and CJ are fantastic and they're more than capable of carrying this back, and it's still only early days in the season. But this front office must be in full panic mode if they're willing to sign Melo this early into the season.
Let's play a game, Patrick. Who had on the Portland roster, who had the worst plus-minus in today's game?
Carmelo Anthony.
Who had the most turnovers?
Carmelo Anthony.
Who had the worst field goal?
Let me guess. Carmelo Anthony.
And outside of CJ McCollum, a bona fide young star in the league, who took the most shots?
It's unbelievable, isn't it?
He hasn't played in how long? He got
A
waived
year,
in the
but
first
serious
10 games of
basketball,
last
5
season.
years?
It was a year ago. A 35-year-old gets the go-ahead from his coach to literally be the mouthpiece to their offense. And what did we think was going to happen? There's a reason.
If there was
he's
that
not
little bit of hope in anyone's mind that he was going to accept this bench role and come in, shoot open threes and rebound and try at least to move his feet on defense, that's gone. He's Carmelo Anthony, and he will always be Carmelo Anthony, and he's not going to accept anything less.
No, I urge our listeners to find that article because it sounds like I'm a hater. And look, I've never agreed with the way he plays basketball. I've never, romanticized it as other people do. But he is a Hall of Famer, and he, in his age, was fantastic at what he did. But let me be clear. I will buy a Portland Carmelo Anthony jersey if he is not waived or re-signed. Because I think it's over. And I wonder why he comes back. And it's his prerogative, it's his right. I've said all of this in the article. But this isn't going to end well. He's not going to recover. It's not, he hasn't played in a year. Let's just give him some slack. Everyone has off games. These are the stats that are going to be more frequent than they're not.
Especially, I don't understand his motive for coming back really either. I understand, love of the game, all that. But if we're looking at, obviously, money's not a problem. Legacy is probably the only other fact. Legacy is the other thing. That's, I would argue, declining significantly every time he steps on the court. And the third would be to get that elusive championship. He's not going to get that on this Portland team. And even by miracle that he does, it'd be him not contributing. It'd be him just miracle, being on the roster, but not playing at all.
There's no miracle.
It's not happening.
This sums it up. He rode a banana inflatable with LeBron James, the second greatest player of all time, and the dude that established the player empowerment era. Almost, I'd say he was the figurehead. Not relevant. The point is, he is the Lakers. He has a history of being Coach LeBron. If he wanted something, he got it. Are you telling me that he couldn't have taught the Lakers, a franchise that last year had Rondo, JaVale McGee, Beasley on their payroll, into giving Melo a 10-day contract?
I think GM LeBron has spoken.
If your best mate and one of the most intelligent basketball minds in the world deems you not worth the risk, then what was Portland thinking? What happened? Why are we here? If 30 of the GMs plus LeBron, plus your knees, you paid a lot of minutes, man. 35 years old.
He's
irrelevant.
Done. He's done.
Since 2013. Just take it, Patrick. I can't.
Portland.
I need my asthma inhaler.
Carmelo Anthony's career should be done. It is done. And I think this might be a sign. This might be the step that we look back on one day at the end of the season and think this is where Portland's season was over. They've 5-10, as we mentioned, and they have the highest strength of schedule remaining. So they're playing the best teams more than anyone else. And this skid, I think, is just going to continue. But that's Carmelo Anthony for you.
And outside of Portland being one of the franchises that has shown a lot of love to players, for example, Damian Lillard, huge contract, great vibes throughout the organization. Questionable moves, but again, that would be us going in circles.
Haven't even mentioned the Whiteside deal, but anyway.
Outside of the character of this franchise, there is no reason to believe anything but the waiving of Carmelo Anthony within 20 games, and that's me being charitable.
So what's the deal here? Is if he plays more than 20 games, you're buying a Melo jersey, or?
No. Because custom jerseys are expensive. They're not printing them. If he makes it through this season and is not waived, I'll buy a Portland jersey with his name on it.
And a formal apology on the podcast?
If that would be fitting, wouldn't it?
I look forward to that not happening.
It's not good for my cardiovascular system right now to continue this conversation.
We need to cool down. This has been a heated pod. This has been some rants in here, and I'm fired up. I need to go relax for a while.
I'm going to go shoot some hoops.
I need some zen.
And I'm going to be shouting Mello from the mid-range. But anyway, Patrick, we're back. It is fantastic to be back.
The legs are warm again. It's been good.
I look forward to talking to you very, very soon.